Amazing. Thank you, Fiona. That's a lovely welcome. Well, kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. It is amazing to be here with you today. So welcome to the session on the status of Australia and New Zealand's fundraising in 2022. So as Fiona said, I am Teresa Judd. I'm Senior Customer Success Manager here at Blackbaud Pacific. So a little bit about me. I originally hail from the UK. I was born and raised in a small town called Presswood, which if anyone knows the UK, it's Great Missenden in Buckinghamshire, but I now reside in New Zealand. I've been here for about 30 years and currently live in a small town called Matamata in the Waikato, which if anyone is familiar with Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit films, this is where they have Hobbiton. So I like to call myself a real life Hobbit sitting in the Waikato. I have been with Blackbaud for almost 11 years. We're getting into crunch time, 10 years and 10 months. I'm creeping into my 11th year. And look, outside of Blackbaud, anything to do with musical theatre, I've recently just finished a local play, dancing, singing, music, movies, dancing, and hanging out with my little humans who are 7 and nearly 5 keep me pretty busy. So a little bit about me, and look, thank you for having me. It's with the help of our great team in the UK, led by Louise Sparks, who is our Blackbaud's content marketing manager, as well as freelance data analyst and market researcher, Susie Mullen, from Analysis and Understanding, that we're able to create this great report for you for Australia and New Zealand. So I am very excited to share the findings and research with you today. If anyone on the call who knows me knows I get very passionate and excited about New Zealand and Australian fundraising. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So look, that's enough about me. Let's jump straight into this. So in this session, I'm going to go through a bit of an introduction into the background of the report, and then we'll kind of take you through the research findings. So looking at income, technology, culture, and collaboration, challenges and opportunities, and then we'll have some time at the end to kind of review some comments. I'm going to ask for some interaction, and then we'll take some time for any questions and discussions at the end. So first off, this is very exciting. For us, this is the first year that we have created the Status of ANZ Fundraising report. So we spoke to quite a few people working in the social good sector to really gather thoughts, opinions on basically everything from income trends, digital transformation, which is, a real buzzword at the moment, to fundraising in the pandemic, pre and post. So the report has since had its launch last month, and very popular. We have now had one of the most downloaded pieces on our resource centre, which we are extremely happy about. So thank you very much. The report was also done for the first time for Canada, but it's in the 5th year in a row now for the UK. So for this presentation, I'm only going to be looking at ANZ data, but you are absolutely more than welcome to go and head to UK and Canada Blackbaud websites, where you can have a look at the full reports for them as well. So let's take a look at kind of who we spoke to. So this year we opened up the online for about 3 weeks in June, and we invited all of our contacts, so both Blackbaud customers and non-customers, to take part. We had over 100 non-profit professionals take the survey and share their views with us. So thank you to everyone who helped us and shared the insights, because without you, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much. 55% of those that took the survey told us that they were fundraisers, and 22% of us had the organisation said that they income of less than 10 million, with quite an astounding 63% reporting that their organisation had an income of more than 10 million. So if you're worrying about that little 15% missing, they didn't want to disclose their income. So for transparency, there was a little gap there. But I've got my first poll coming up for you. So if you would like to tell us, we would love to know where you kind of fit into this. So please let us know on your organisational income. Are you less than 1 million? Are you between 1 and 10 million? Or are you over 10 million? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of time. Hopefully it's still at the beginning, so you're still with me on this journey and you haven't popped off to get a coffee. So a few minutes to answer that question, and then we'll carry on. So thank you for the input here. Okay, what have we got? Okay, so that is great. Less than mil, between 1 to 10, and over 10. Okay, thank you very much for answering that question. That gives us some good insight on who is on the call listening with us today. So let's look at some questions that we asked in the survey. So we looked at, in the survey, we were really looking at relation to really timely and relevant topics. So many of which relate to changes brought about by the pandemic, but also include that buzzword again, digital transformation, as well as culture and collaboration we were really interested in. So let's get stuck into some of those findings. And we're first going to take a look about what we learned about income. So we asked respondents to think about the last full financial year and to tell us how their organisation's voluntary income changed compared with the year before. Now, a couple of you might be asking the question, what is voluntary income? So when we talk about voluntary income, it really is the term given to income received by charitable organisations. So usually donations, but could potentially also include some grants. And we've got the results in front of you on screen now. So looking at the graph, you will see that 31% said that income has increased and 18% said income has decreased compared to this year, to the year before. While 16% remained the same, but what I find a little bit interesting here though, is kind of what's not being said. And that there is a 31% who responded to this are either not sure or don't know, which I think is a little bit scary. So when you think about it, it's either they can't do any comparisons, so potentially some technology might be in the way, or they're not close enough to their data or activity to provide an answer. When considering the amount of people that told us they were fundraisers, again, is kind of something to think about here. But when I kind of look at this, my first thoughts are, you know, 2021 was a really hard year. I think arguably the hardest for New Zealand. We spent most of 21 in various stages of lockdown, as well as Australia was hit really hard with lockdowns and also natural disasters. So it's really no surprise to see that there is a decent percentage here of decreased or remaining the same income. However, I've always stated, having been in the game for 20 odd years, that we are a very generous giving nations, and I stand fast. We stand fast in the face of adversity. So for me, to kind of see that we're back up in this increased percentage is a great start to getting back on our feet. So I was very happy to kind of see this slide. Now, of course, we asked everyone, so your income is growing, awesome. Tell us and give us a bit of an idea about why you think it's growing. And we provided some options. So when we think about the main driver of your organization's income and growth, and as this chart demonstrates, the most frequently selected driver of growth that we saw are those exceptional gifts. So legacies, major gifts, so those kind of really big one-off gifts, with 39% selected that what drove their income growth. Second, 27% of people said the driver was because of new and different activity, which I was really excited to see. It means that we're kind of shaking things up a bit. We're potentially, thinking of different ways of engagement, maybe giving some things a facelift. So, we're on the right path there. And also the third one is having the right level of investment into fundraising. So, what I will say that's interesting here as well is that, the reasoning for our pandemic is sitting at the very bottom of 12%. Whereas when you look at the UK report, it is exactly the other way around, where the UK reported it as its second highest driver of income at 35%. So that is a very stark difference between the two. Why? You could draw your own conclusions into that, but I just found that quite particularly interesting. And of course, we asked the same thing. So those that saw a decline in their incomes, what were some of the reasons that were causing these declines? So unfortunately, we didn't get enough sample size to show some actual figures here, but what we can see as an indication of trends, as you can see here, is that the main driver of organizational income decline was the pandemic, which I don't think is going to be a shock to anyone here, but it's also how that negatively impacts our ability to raise those funds. Other responses weren't adequately resourced to grow funding, Lower gift values, so lower gift values across the board, so generally. The previous year potentially had seen some pretty exceptional giving, so gifts that we just couldn't be expected to match, or there just weren't enough people with the right skills in the right place to grow income. So what's a learning here is that, you know, it's kind of gift values, exceptional performance, but it also shows us how important teams and people are to fundraising success and growing that income. So a couple of some good factors here. And finally, the final part, the last part of this income section, you know, when we look at fundraising performance versus target. So we asked respondents to describe their fundraising targets. And here we can see, you know, the proportion who say their organisation missed or met and exceeded targets, with the majority, so that 33% again, are exceeding their fundraising targets, which is brilliant. I was very happy to see that. While 23% are kind of met and, you know, 19 didn't quite meet. But again, what I find comforting about these responses here is that there are more organisations that still met or exceeded fundraising targets than that didn't. So that really shows we've got a great ability to forecast correctly and plan accordingly, and why that is so significant. However, still concerning to me is that there is still that 10% that really aren't sure or don't know. So potentially this might be playing into that not having the right people in the right role, or directly impacted by the next topic, which we're going to go into. But when we think about reflection of income, you know, I'd imagine most wouldn't be really surprised to see these, you know, considering what we've been through in the last couple of years. But interesting to me, the biggest driver of growth is around that exceptional giving. But, you know, overwhelmingly, the pandemic has had, you know, the most detrimental effect and the biggest driver of decline of income kind of across the board. So, you know, and there is a little part to play in, you know, not having the right people in the right place, which is an interesting point to talk about. So I welcome some comments in the chat. We're going to be hopefully going to go through these at the end. So if you feel like you're on par with these, or you have some comments or discussions you'd make around that, I'd love to hear those. So please pop them through. Okay, so now we're going to move on to my favorite part, technology. So we started off by asking people to what extent they agree or disagree with some of the statements about tech. So this is it's a busy slide, but, you know, I am overwhelmingly seeing green, which is fantastic. So, you know, the green's percentage of agree with the statements, and in the orange, we have the percentage who disagree with some of those statements. So almost everyone, so 84% agree that technology helps them to improve relationships with supporters, and we like that. Furthermore, 75% say that they 21% use data to improve decision making, and while 70% say that they do invest in technology, there's only 38% say that they actually get the most out of it. You know, and so 45% disagree with that statement. So it's clear that there is an opportunity for organizations to really focus on realizing the benefits of their technology. But it really surprised me, and I have to say, you know, considering my job, quite disappointing to see that there is a third of organizations that get the most out of their technology. So only a third, should I say, you know, especially when there is such a widespread agreement about the benefits of investing in technology and how it can help with that supporter experience. And I think there are many reasons why people aren't getting the most out of technology. You know, we know that people are pressed for time. They don't always have the time to kind of stop and take stock and take charge of what they've got. But from what other conversations with the nonprofits that we had in the UK and Canada, and I'm telling you this because I think it's important to point out from the research that we carried out there, is that the trend is exactly the same across these countries. So only a third feel like they're getting the most out of their technology. So from speaking to organizations, many are saying the same thing. So to truly get the most out of technology, you need to understand basically from the very beginning what your end goals are and what you need to achieve. Because if you don't know what you need to get over here, then it's almost impossible to build a path to get to it. You know, and where this is becoming, you know, critical, and I can't kind of explain this enough. For me and into my role and building success for my organizations, it is absolutely critical to get that buy-in or include, excuse me, include your higher level stakeholders and executives into these conversations. Because if you're not having these plans and strategies in place first, then to invest in the right technology, that's where you can fulfill some of those ambitions. And you're more likely to get the most out of it, rather than investing in tech for tech's sake and then expecting it to drive your success without really any main input to it. And again, I refer back to my earlier point, which may be another case of not having the right people in the right place, or potentially the right level of skill needed for you to feel like you're getting the most out of your technology. Look, I would love if there's anyone online with us today that kind of feels like they fall into that disagree category. So you feel like you're not getting the most out of your technology. If you're willing to share, I would love to hear why you kind of feel that way. So if someone's open and willing to share that, I would love to hear that in the chat. I also want to share a slide here about the digital maturity, which is a very key buzzword. Digital transformations, digital maturity. You know, we, dare I say it, had to pivot into a digital world. So we asked respondents to score their organization on a scale of 1 to 10, kind of really regarding where they would be on this digital maturity spectrum. So, and when we talk about digital maturity, we really think of an organization that is one of that's digitally integrated kind of across all areas. So fundraising, service deliverability, supporter experience, internal processes, etc. So we had 59, when we kind of look at 6 and above, 59% of themselves scored a 6 and over, which is great, good to see, with 41% kind of scored 5 and below. And what we saw was an average of about 5.9. So we're kind of feeling like we're in the middle there, which is, you know, considering we had to do a lot of digital shifting the last couple of years, I'm quite happy to see those results. Again, if anyone has any comments or concerns or questions about those, would love to hear them. One of the great things about doing these surveys is that we get to talk to some pretty amazing people. And so we had some conversations with some charities who participated along the way. One of them was Mike Keach, head of fundraising at Make-A-Wish New Zealand. And I just wanted to share something that he said in relation to technology. Our core pillars are people, data, storytelling, and this underpins the mission. We can be led by insights and data if we can tell great stories. Look after people both internally and externally, then in theory, if you're doing all of those things right, then you should be doing well, which is a great comment. I shared this recently at the FINS at the conference, and I couldn't agree more, 100% on Mike's comment there. So the next section we're kind of going to move into is culture and collaboration. So this was a new topic. So the UK have done this for the last 5 years. So this is a new one that they added into their survey for 22, which of course we wanted to include as well. So we asked our respondents how well they felt the different teams and departments within their organisation kind of work together. And the results were interesting. So we asked everyone to give themselves a score out of 10 on a collaboration spectrum. So where the lowest score is 1, basically aligned with, no, we work in silos very much independently. And the high score being 10, we look at really collaboration, big collaboration, teams, departments, we work easily and seamlessly. And this is what we saw. So only 16% of organizations gave themselves a 9 or a 10, which actually is quite higher than I thought, which is great. Some people think that they're doing this really well, which is fantastic. Just over half is kind of where I thought it would be. So about that between 6 and 8, and we had a third score themselves 5 and below. So, I mean, it's not really surprising to learn that those with higher scores consistently likely to be more optimistic, a bit more digitally mature, willing to adapt, which is a huge one, keen and willing to be innovative, respond to feedback, take risks. And, you know, interestingly, they tend to be a bit on the smaller side. So potentially maybe a bit more nimble, quicker to respond to feedback, easier to kind of team up together, which was an interesting point. And it really does appear here that there is a particular mindset and attitude here that kind of allows for certain organizations to thrive. So in this kind of open-minded approach, that gives us time for employees to work together. You know, there's an example where we spoke to one smaller organization who were historically funded through government grants, had only recently introduced a fundraising team. And the new fundraising manager spent the first 3 months of her role, so a third of her time for the first year, getting to know all the different departments, introducing them to what she would be doing as a fundraiser, getting buy-in, building trust, building some empowerment within those own teams. So where everyone truly kind of understood how they would work together to achieve some of these goals and outcomes. And I think that's a world-class example on why collaboration is so critically important. Optimism for the next 12 to 18 months. So we also asked people how they kind of felt they were going to be going for the next 12 to 18 months. And you know, we say that we were surprised to learn this. I'm not surprised at all. Australians and New Zealanders are very optimistic. And so even in the aftermath of the pandemic and lockdowns, we are still optimistic. So you can see here that that green bar smashing through it. So 71% of people were optimistic in their organization's ability to deliver those services. 61% were optimistic that they would retain supporters, reach new audiences, and meet their fundraising targets. So just over half were optimistic that all their organizations will thrive. And I can't tell you how much I love seeing all this green. So when we think about even with all of the challenges that we've had to face, 71% remain optimistic that they will continue to deliver services. This sector is resilient. The people are strong. And this is such a clear representation of why I love being in this sector. I'd love to hear how you feel. How are you feeling the next 12 to 18 months are going to go? Do you align with the statistics that we're seeing here? Have you got some other thoughts? Again, pop them in the chat. Would love to hear that. And I will end this chapter with another great quote from Mike from Make-A-Wish, where he says, collaboration is essential, as is learning from each other. We're never perfect. So by collaborating and communicating to others, we can be better together. Great quote. I do think that COVID-19 highlighted the importance of connectivity, and we had to work harder to collaborate online and offline. When we're working remotely, we encouraged and supported our team to connect. And I've always been remote. So based in New Zealand, I've always been a remote worker. I've become very used to working in a remote situation. But I know for a lot of people that that was a very, very hard reality for some to face, of being remote in home, mental health issues kind of built up. And so to hear the head of fundraising have such a great support over that team encouragement and support and collaborate while we were doing that was wonderful to hear. So now to the final section, challenges and opportunities. So when we did the survey, we asked people to select up to 5 challenges from a pretty long list. And so on the slide, you'll see that the top 7 challenges were what we felt, or they felt, that we were facing in 2022. No surprise, that economic situation, #1 challenge by a long way, with 70% of people selecting this. But adapting to new ways of fundraising as a result of the pandemic is second with 46. Switching to digital, again, you might not have been in a digital world before the pandemic. You might not have had much online presence. And so, again, pivoting into that digital approach may have been a really difficult task for you. Other things, retaining and recruiting fundraising talent in that time at 44%. So the remaining are fairly split quite evenly, with communicating the case to relevant ways. Rising costs of fundraising is also, always going to be in there. Recovering financially from the impact of the pandemic in the years before. And also, look, keeping up with the changing pace of technology. So having all 3 of those kind of all 4 of those kind of represented in a fairly even margin was pretty interesting to see. So again, I'm going to ask you if you kind of see yourself aligning with these. Do you feel the same, or would you feel like potentially we have a different challenge, or you have a different challenge that you're facing? Would love to hear your thoughts in the chat. And again, to what kind of extent do we agree or disagree with some of the following statements: that their organisation have clear goals that they're working towards together, has a strategy that's fit for purpose, and prioritises long-term over short-term? So consistently, people agree that their organisation can do all 3 things. And so what's reassuring is that that little orange bar, that disagree, is very, very small. And so what we know by that is that organizations feel like they are set up for success. They have clear goals, they've got a clear strategy, and they're really focusing on that long term, which is the biggest opportunity I think that this sector has. And so what we can see, like when we kind of look back at the start and the stability and the financial performance versus targets, I think there are some really key takeaway messages here. One, long-term strategies with key stakeholder and executives are absolutely key. Couldn't stress that enough. Really allowing time to really understand your technology that you're investing in. Excuse me. So training, upskilling, all will work towards empowering staff, which is one of my biggest goals personally, is to really make sure that my customers and my users are fully empowered into what they're using. But the flip side to that is that by investing in training and upskilling, it's really bringing new skills as a whole into your organization, but also to build the talent pool within the bigger sector. So, people choose to move on, which they do, and we kind of all move around looking to recruit. There is going to be a much wider pool of talent to choose from. And in all of this uncertainty, what are the things that you as your organization are able to control? Building the relationships with your people, allowing them to collaborate and work better, really working together in what they can learn from each other. When I think back at all of those things, those are the real key learnings that I think we can take away from all of this. So look, that kind of brings me to the end of the findings. I'm conscious that I've done a lot of talking and I've shared a lot of information. Look, and if you'd wish to download the full report, if you haven't, you can use the little QR code. So take out your camera and scan the QR code, or you can go directly to the link. We will be sending a follow-up email with the link to the report along with the slides and some other great resources of interest from our Pacific Resource Hub. And we'll also include a link to our Blackbaud Institute, which, if you haven't been there, is full of amazing information and really focuses on global trends and some of those leading edge research. So I've got one more poll for you, and then I promise I won't have any more. Now that you've kind of seen the results, you've heard all the feedback, I'd really like to know how you feel like you align with these overall findings. So I'd love, above and beyond, I feel like I match to all of these and more. And if you're one of those, I would love to talk to you. Very close, we align very close, we are somewhat comparable or not at all. And again, similarly, if you feel like you're one of those not at all people and you don't feel like you can relate at all to these, we'd also love to talk to you about potentially how we might be able to help build you back up and bring you into the same level of some of these findings that we've got, bring you into the green and out of the orange, so to speak. So give that a few more moments, just to keep making sure that you're with me as well. Always put one at the end to keep you awake. Okay, all right. Well, look, we've got some people that are above and beyond. That is fantastic. I expected most to be kind of sitting around the very close or somewhat, so that is exactly what I expected. And anyone sitting in that not at all, would love to chat to you. So if anyone is interested in having a chat, please info@blackbaud.com.au, send us an email. We'd love to have a chat with you. And so look, this kind of brings me to the end. I want to thank you so much for having me join you today and share this research. Again, a lot of information. I really hope that you've enjoyed the session and that you got a lot out of it. And any questions or anything that you want to chat further about, if not my customers, you can email me directly or you can send to info@blackbaud.com.au. We would love to hear from you. So with that, I will hand you back to Fiona.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks so much for going through the research and the findings. That was really interesting. We have had some questions and comments coming through, so I will put those to you now. I'll start with the Q&A box. And we've got a question here from Ben who asks, do we have a sense of whether or not donors feel like tech is helping them connect? And I just clarified that with Ben, and what he means is tech helping donors connect with charities? And I appreciate the study asked set questions, but obviously you have had discussions with nonprofits along the way. So what perhaps have you got from nonprofits about how connected donors feel through tech? or your own thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer, because I think technology is very much a generational gap too. So very much dependent on the organization that you work for and where your demographics kind of set in terms of who your audience is. It's very different. So if you're an organization who is trying to engage and acquire maybe some more youth youth donors, then technology is definitely going to be the way to go. No one, all the youth have always got their phone in their hand. I mean, I'm in the same. I'm part of the millennial group, and so if I can't get to it on my phone within a couple of seconds, you've potentially lost me. Whereas my mum and her generation still love the bit of paper, like to respond, like to write a note. So I think it really does depend on your organization, the direction that you want to go, who you potentially want to engage with the most, and that acquisitional kind of aspect. But in the pandemic specifically, I think technology was absolutely the way that we had to go. And you can be more reactive with technology. You can put some great workflows in place where as soon as someone has a birthday coming up, an email goes out to say happy birthday, whereas the time and effort that would have taken resource to send a letter, potentially create a card but the times are also shifting into much more of a digital world too. So I'm not entirely sure if that kind of answers the question, but I think it's very much based on the content that you're wanting to share and who you're trying to get to is where that technology is going to reach people.
Absolutely. Ben has said thank you, and yes, the generational aspect is a major factor, but I think actually I would struggle to put any numbers to this, but I think it was revealed during the pandemic that older generations are much more connected through technology and social media than we previously believed them to be. So there's definitely something there for
absolutely.
every age group.
And there's been a couple of case studies that I've watched where an organization, I think it was a soccer club in the UK, who had some major donor events that they had to move online, ended up getting this next generation of major giving prospects because these people had to help their parents engage in this online event. And so their philanthropy kind of started rubbing off on that generation. And then they had this whole new connectivity of, oh, my mum and dad support this. I've got to help them get onto this online event. This looks pretty cool. Maybe I can continue my mum and dad's work. So there has been a big shift in that younger generation having to help some of their parents or aunties, grandparents. Look, my grandma is turning 96. I FaceTime with her on her iPad all the time. So I think that there is a much bigger percentage using that we might not be aware of too.
Absolutely. We've got a question here from Sophia. Do you think training costs are holding back not-for-profits from getting the most out of their tech?
I would say that's a very realistic answer. I have always said that training should be built into every single budget. Whether you use that training or not is completely irrelevant, but having it there, I think, is absolutely critical. Not necessarily, look, people move around all the time. So training could be internal training, new technology that comes out, but it could also be, I'm now having to train an entirely new person. And if I don't have any budget set aside for any of that, then that's really going to hold me back. So I'm 100% definitely, you must have training in your budget every single year. And if you don't use it, if you can disperse it into a different budget line, but definitely I think potentially training costs or not factoring in potential training costs is what's been holding some people back.
Absolutely. I've got a question here from Helen, who asks, are there any comparisons with the for-profit sector around the use of tech and the optimism or pessimism in economic future?
It's a good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. I'm happy to go back and kind of ask the question around if we got any comparisons in the for versus non, but to hand, unfortunately, I don't have any of those comparisons, but I would be interested to read those as well.
Yeah, I mean, my guess would be that it would, the comparison would lie in so many things that compare for-profit and non-profit, which comes down to budget and resourcing available, and you know, I would imagine that many corporates and for-profit organizations have a bigger training budget and more capability to invest. But yeah, if you find anything, Teresa, that would be great.
Sure.
There was a comment here from Carl, and he's told me that he is happy to be taken off mute. Jamie, if you're happy to include him in the conversation.
Oh, hello, Carl.
Carl is a really experienced fundraiser.
Incredibly experienced.
Yes, we know well at F&P as well. And he made a comment that he thinks the rising cost of fundraising is going to catch a few charities out. And I was just interested to hear what he had to say about that.
Oh, brilliant.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Carl.
That's good. Well, cost of fundraising is a complex issue. I think, first of all, most people would know that I don't even like the term, and wish that the sector could recalibrate that language, particularly so that boards and the public understand that we have to invest in fundraising, we need to be compliant, and we need to show appreciation to our donors. And so therefore cost of fundraising language in itself, needs to demonstrate those three aspects. However, I think there's another challenge when it comes to cost of fundraising for the sector. And in part, you touched on that with digital fundraising, which is essentially, an emerging transformational channel at this point in time. But some of this demonstrates not the fragmentation, but the diversification of channels. If we went back in time, it wasn't so long ago that face-to-face didn't exist. It wasn't so long ago that it was direct mail being the main source of your revenue, and you could get scale for that. And Teresa, you mentioned another aspect about getting the right people. Well, with this channel diversification, we need more expertise in the digital space, whether it's direct mail, face-to-face, et cetera, et cetera. Mm. But this in itself then demonstrates another challenge. It's actually getting appropriate ROI and appropriate scale from those respective activities. And we're having to invest in this diversification of channels, and that in itself is increasing the costs. Mm. But we're in another little challenging situation at the moment. The cost of living is going up for everyone, and we're seeing that impact fundraising as well, whether it's mail, salaries, face-to-face fees, acquisition costs, and then just the cost to actually service our donors. And again, we're almost in this perpetual challenge of then trying to explain to the public and to our boards why our cost of fundraising costs are incrementally increasing. And then that leads to that other perpetual challenge that they want to dial in those acquisition investments and then investing in teams and so forth, let alone CRM costs to support the infrastructure to deliver our services to donors. And then they'll seek to maybe rein in acquisition so to maintain the net returns. So now I've probably just depressed everybody.
No, you've made some really good points there, Carl. And Teresa, you might have some comments. One of the things that I just really picked up on, which I perhaps haven't really thought about before, Carl, that you mentioned is, as we're becoming more innovative and sophisticated in fundraising, we're constantly coming up with new ideas and new channels and channels within channels and tactics within tactics. And all of these things require skills and experience. And people either need to be trained in that, or they need to be recruited into those roles. And quite often in smaller charities, we've got one fundraiser trying to do everything, and that is going to include trying to learn brand new ways of doing things, and it is going to be a real challenge to constantly meet the pace of innovation. Is going to need more and more people with new skills and the experience. So I think that's a very good point. Teresa, did you have any comments?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, thank you, Carl, for bringing all that up. I think it's not depressing at all. I think it's reality. And I think that needs to be, everyone needs to have very clear front of mind when it comes into what's going to be happening next year. And you're right, touching on digital and the shift, when I first started at Child Cancer, it was 2002. So 20 years ago, we had 3 people. Online wasn't a thing. Text messaging wasn't a thing. And so I feel like there are some charities that feel like potentially they might be getting left behind in that realm because it is completely new resources and skills that are needed in that digital world. We talked about social influencers and we kind of eyebrows raised at those online, but it's becoming so paramount now that they are the people that you need in your organization to have media strategies, to have digital goals, digital ROI, how are we going to track that? Google Analytics are playing such a massive part. Where are we tracking from? You know, we're tracking you left, right, and center. So I think you raised a great point around it is about, you know, skills and resources, but now trying to find these people and get them into the nonprofit world, which is where, you know, the question around profit versus non-profit, I'd love to see some of those comparisons. But no, I just thank you for kind of raising those. And as I said, I think it needs to be a reality that we need to keep in check.
Can I add another point?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, and just in that mix is then having the boards and supporting you through the testing of that, because each charity will go through a different testing phase, and on their respective strategies, they might be growing their donor base and so forth, and be entering these spaces for the first time. But then there'll be that pressure to still raise revenue while they're breaking even at best. Yep,
that's right. It's a very good point. And I think that's where potentially some of the harder work is for the executives, is to build that trust, where we're going to have to, you know, we need to spend money to make money has always been the hardest thing to get across the board, especially from a fundraiser perspective. So yeah, that board, or having the trust of your board or your leadership is yeah, it's pretty critical.
Absolutely. Carl, thank you so much for adding your voice and your comments. We really appreciate that. I've got a question here from Caroline, and if you're not able to answer this one, Teresa, I've got a couple of thoughts, but she asks, do you have data and do you ever look at categories as to where funding actually goes? So health or scholarships or Indigenous programs, do Blackbaud have any of that kind of funding by cause area?
I'm not entirely sure if we've kind of dived into where exactly some of that comms go. I don't know if Emily can put some comment in the chat potentially, but I think part of having done this first ANZ report is that we're really now looking to expand into what more questions can we look at, and potentially sectorizing some of that. So is it healthcare? Is it human services? Is it animal welfare? And then really kind of figuring out potentially some of that balance. So we asked in the survey, who are you? What's your organizational income? But we did miss out, from what the looks of it, that sector that you're sitting in. And so I don't have anything to hand. I'm happy to kind of look through some of our archives, and there may be stuff on the Institute or in our resource hubs that we can pull in. But if we don't, then I think that would be a great opportunity to put into some future surveys like this.
Yeah, and it would be good, I guess, kind of to understand some of the other, you know, are there cultural trends across different course areas and so on. I would say from an Australian perspective, Caroline, I don't know if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that the ATO and the ACNC publish kind of giving reports at the end of each financial year, and they do break all of those down by sector, by cause area, so you would get a really clear picture as to you know, what goes to animal welfare, what goes to religious causes and so on. So if you're in Australia, they're really good resources. I don't know what the equivalent is in New Zealand, but yes, that gives a bit more of a detailed breakdown. Now, I had a question for you, Teresa. I don't think I've missed anyone's question. I hope not. But I just wanted to ask you kind of, what was one thing that surprised you, one thing that pleased you, and one thing that concerned you in amongst the findings from the research?
Okay, what concerned me was those that don't know. I think I made that pretty clear. It's quite concerning for me that there was a huge percentage, 31%, said that they didn't know or couldn't tell. So that for me is really concerning. That could be that, one, they're not close enough to the activity to actually know, and two, potentially they've got some technology barriers in their way. So that's a pretty big concern for me. What I love seeing is that we are such an optimistic bunch of people. Like those outstanding greens across the board, I absolutely love seeing that. It's part of why I love being in this sector. Even with everything that we've had thrown at us in the last 2 years, we are still dramatically so optimistic about, no, we've got this, or, you know, should be right, as the Kiwis say. You know, it's the ingenuity and I get really excited and kind of passionate about when I think about it, that the people in this sector, I think, are by far some of the best in the world. And so that optimism was fantastic. What surprised me? I don't think anything totally. Oh, actually, I was quite surprised that pandemic was actually right at the bottom of us in terms of growth, because you know, I think I've mentioned this before, and that, you know, when we had and I speak from a New Zealand perspective, the Christchurch earthquakes, and we had a lot of natural disasters happen, there was kind of fundraising shook, because it's like everything's going to go down. All of our money is going to go towards these natural disasters, and potentially this could be felt the same across Australia when you've got your floodings and your fires. But then what we saw in those years is overwhelmingly income stayed the same, if not got better, even with these disasters. And I will continue to say that we are a generous bunch of people, and that we will continue to keep our giving, and then we go above and beyond in terms of when it's needed. So but to Carl's point, cost of living now may have a huge impact on people's decision-making processes and how they feel like they can donate to charities. So I was a little bit surprised to see that pandemic was at the bottom, because I would have thought, again, with the UK it being the second highest increase, I thought it would have been a little bit higher, with, you know, us coming into the play and supporting our charities when we know that they needed it the most. So I would say probably for me, that was my most surprising part, is to see it all the way down the bottom.
Absolutely. And Carl makes a good point here that natural disasters often get people into the habit of giving. And I'm sure for quite a lot of people, donating to a natural disaster is their first experience of giving. So I do agree with that. I guess that the trick then is to keep them on board and keep them engaged beyond that kind of impulsive giving.
Yeah, that's right. It's the hook, or as we like to call them, the emotional, the emotional givers, or the angry donor, who right. not necessarily from an angry perspective, but it's that emotionalness. So yes. You know, it's that that urgency to give, what emotes that emotional feeling, and for you is very much like a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, you need our money, we're going to give to you. It's then how you can continue riding on that high, which is where the strategies come into place of, do you have a workflow behind it to hook those people in within 24 hours? Can you get them onto a major or a regular, or all of those types of giving? So it all kind of plays part into that, which is, yeah, it's right. Those typically do become someone's leap or stepping stone into the giving world.
Absolutely. And I've just got one more question for you, Teresa. I haven't seen any more come through in the Q&A box. You obviously, what the findings revealed is that there's quite a lot of organizations that just don't feel like they're making the most of their technologies. What have, in your conversations with nonprofits, why do you think that's happening? Where do you think the gaps are? Is it because they don't have training? Is it because they just don't understand the products that they're using?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite a combination of both, actually. I think even after all these years, training is just not put into budgets, because when we think about where the money needs to go, it's into supporter services, it's into the cause. But again, if you're not putting that in the foundational development, you're actually not going to get any of that on the front line. But it's also, you know, people are very resource poor. I think the most resource poor we've ever seen people at the moment. There is a lot of staff churn. And when we spend, and I can personally say, I spend a lot of time with an organization getting their team up to speed, and then that core person leaves, basically have to start all over again. And when we think about that, everything has to carry on business as usual at the same time as having to do this, that we kind of feel like we're just getting into a good swing, and then that person leaves again. Or they just don't have they don't feel like it's a catch-22, right? Because you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because if you took the time to sit down, get some resources, get some processes in place, put some workflows down, it would save you time on the other side. But it's always the case of, I don't have time to do this, so I will continue to struggle over here. So it's really about having a very clear understanding that I must dedicate time to some of these to then help me further on down the track. And it's like I've always said, I can't, and back in the day of being a DBA, I can't build you this report over here if you don't include me back here, because you can't come to me at this point and go, I want all of these statistics. And if I've not captured them along the way because you haven't told me back here, I can't help you. So it's the same kind of deal. You really have to involve everybody from the beginning, but don't silo yourself into one person being that technology person. you have to have what we call individual, that person who is in charge of that department within the database. So taking empowerment back into the staff to really give them the resources and that, again, that empowerment to kind of make choices and understand the systems themselves. But again, having backing from the leadership team and the trust to be able to go and do something like that.
I was just going to say, it's very important that it comes from the top, that you're actually given the space and time to do training and truly understand. Because I think if you're in a fundraising role, we can all get caught up with always prioritising what's going to bring dollars in, and you're not given enough time to do the background work. So no, good points there. Well, we're coming up to 1 o'clock, so I will just run through quickly. So we will, as I said before, we will be sending out an email with a recording to the webinar. I believe some resources from Blackbaud, Teresa, will be included in there. I wanted to mention that there is actually an article on the F&P website that we wrote. We did a kind of summary of the report. It's called How is Your Charity Tracking? We will include a link in the email to that article. Next week I will publish an article I'm doing about the UK, Blackbaud's UK report, which followed exactly the same structure, and we can draw, upon the parallels and the differences between the two. I think that's interesting to see, particularly because we quite often kind of follow the UK in trends. So lots of resources there, which we will send out to everyone by email. But Teresa, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you coming along and presenting the findings, and hopefully this is something that will happen every year and we can start building that year on year.
Absolutely. I would love to come back every year and do this, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm sure you can tell I kind of get quite passionate about this and get quite animated talking about it. So it's been a pleasure to have you, for you to have me. So kia ora team, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who attended this afternoon. We look forward to getting in touch with you by email. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.